So first of all, we are going to clean up the budget. So let's start with 2022. So in order to convert this into a usable format, we are going to need a column for the item category, a column for month, a column for year, and a column for amount. Those are the only columns that we need. So these will run for 2022, 2023, and 2024. So that we, instead of having 3 tables, we only have 1 table. So let's go ahead and do that. So starting off 2022, we're going to select anywhere inside the table, as this is a table. So if your data is not already a table, if let's say, for example, it's a range, you need to first to convert it into a table. And a quick way to do it is selecting all the rows and columns, holding Control-T on your keyboard, and then click, and then confirming that your table has headers, and then click OK. Then once that is done, select anywhere inside the table, go to data, and this is the Power Query section, where you can get data from text, from web, from tables, from pictures, from recent sources, existing connections, and more. Even databases, SQL, Azure, Power Platform, and other sources that you might have. So for us, we're going to need a table from table or range. So it will automatically detect where we have selected and select the table for us. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make these, we need to unpivot the months column. So just select the first month, January 2022, hold Shift on your keyboard and select the last month. Before we do that, let's get rid of the totals column, because we want to find the totals in our analytics. So we don't need the totals in our raw data. So I'm going to remove that, as well as the totals row here. And then I'm going to say go to home, then remove rows, remove bottom rows, and then I just want to remove 1 row. Click OK. So it removes the last row. So next up, we're going to unpivot the data. So select the first month, hold Shift on your keyboard, and select the last month to select the whole selection. And then come to transform and click on these unpivot columns. So depending on your screen size, you might not see the name, but the button is here. You can click the drop down and click on unpivot columns. So we have changed the format very quickly using Power Query, and we now have the format that we desire. However, the year and the month are still in the same column. So next is we are going to select the attribute column, go to transform again, then split columns by delimiter. So it automatically detects the delimiter that is there. So if it doesn't already have, you can type in your own delimiter, but you can also choose from other delimiter types from here. And then each occurrence, so this checks whether there is if you have several delimiters in your text, it will separate them or split the column on each occurrence. However, if you only have one, if you have several but you only need to separate it in one, and you know where it is located, you can either choose the leftmost, the rightmost. But in this case, it's each occurrence because we have one. So all options here would work in our case. Then click OK. Now we have the year is not very well formatted. It's 22 instead of 2022. So lastly is we're going to select the column, go to home, replace values, and then find the value 22 and then convert it to 20. Then click OK. So then the last thing we do is rename this to month, and then this to year, and then this to budget. And then there we are, and then rename this to 2022 budget. And then we're going to close and load to. Let's load it to a table in a new worksheet so that we can see the difference. Or let's load it into the existing worksheet right here so that we can see the difference. Let's put it below here. Click OK. And there we are. So the data that was in this horizontal table has been converted into a vertical table where now we can use the analytics in a proper way. So let's do the same for 2022. There we are. So this table has been changed to this table. And lastly, we do the same for 2022, 2024. So finally, this is what you should get. So next up is you're going to clean up the items table. So normally this is a common occurrence for data where column heads are described within two different rows. So the first thing we need to do is we need to convert this into a table. Control T. And in this case, we are going to say our table does not have headers. Then the next thing is we are going to load it into the data more into Power Query. And so the first thing you want to do is you want to transpose the data so that you can have the columns side by side. So I'm going to come here to transform, transpose, and you can see now we have the different rows as columns. So this converts rows as columns. So after that is we are going to merge the two first columns. So select the two, right click, merge columns, and then indicate the separator that you want. We want a space. We don't really care how it's going to be named because we are later going to transpose it back. So click OK. So now we have a merged column which represents our row, our column heads. Item ID, item name, category, description. So these as well, they are two names, which we're going to see later. Then we're going to transpose the data back. So now, as you can see, we have the different, the combined column heads, and we're going to promote them as column heads. So just click on this drop down here, and then say use first row as headers. So after that is we are going to separate these information here because it's a category as well as a item description. So what we're going to do is select the column, right click, and then split by delimiter. It's going to automatically detect our delimiter. Okay. So it changes the columns into two. And the first one is the item category. So which we're just going to name category. And the last one is item category description, item description, sorry, description. And then we're going to name this table item. Click and load to table, existing worksheet, just next to that so that we can see the difference. So we have successfully converted these two columns into one row. So these, the simplest way would have been to delete these and put them on top here. But if you need this to work automatically, that each time you have a new data set, you don't have to go do the steps again. Power Query remembers those steps. As you can see, as you have seen, let's just open the Power Query window again. As you can see, it records the applied steps here so that each time you have a new data set of the same type, it will apply the same steps again for you so that you don't have to repeat them again. We are going to convert the LPOs. It's the same procedure. There we are. We have our LPO data. So lastly, let's see how you can clean these suppliers information here into a single table with these column heads. So the first thing we do, as we've done the previous steps, is we are going to convert this into a table. Control T on your keyboard. My table does not have headers. Click OK. So after you've created the table, let's add this to the data model from table range. And the first thing we need to do is get rid of any rows that are unwanted. So if you have some total rows in your data, you can get rid of them here. And if you have some null rows, you can just highlight these, deselect the null and click OK. And then also check whether you have nulls in this column. You don't have nulls there, and that's fine. The first thing we need to do is pivot the data. So remember, unpivoting the data was converting columns into rows, but in this case, we need to convert rows into columns so that for each of these rows from 1 to 9 are converted into columns, and for each we have some values underneath. However, in order to do that, the data must have at least one unique index for each row. So what we're going to do is come to add columns, and then we add an index column. So we can say from either 0 or from 1. Let's use from 1. Next up is we are going to unpivot this column, because this is the column that has the repeating values that we need, which are the column heads. We're going to come to transform and then click on pivot column. And then it asks you, where are your values from? We want to get the values from column 2 here. And then if this was maybe you wanted to aggregate, you would use this, but in this case, we don't want to aggregate. And then click OK. So as you can see here, we have, let me close this out so that we have some space. We have the supply ID, the supplier name, the contact role, street, city, address, county, contact, and yeah, that's the last one. So this is the information that we need in the tabular format. That is good. But for each record, as you can see, it's stepping down. So for the first supplier, the name is in the second row, contact name in the subsequent row, sales manager in the subsequent row, and so forth and so on. So what we need to do is ensure at least for at least one of the rows, we have the full information. So the way we do that is we come to home. First of all, let's select all these columns. Notice you don't need to select the supply ID. We are going to keep it as it is. We're going to use that as the first row that has all the data that we need. But from the supplier name all the way to the last value, select those columns. Then come to transform, fill, and then click on fill up, so that all this information that is stepping down is filled upwards. So we're going to say fill up. So as you can see, we have at least one row that has the complete supply information. These might be repeating, but for the first one is here, the second one is here, the third one is here, and all those are unique rows. So all that we need to do now is get rid of the null rows. Click OK, and there we are. So all we need to do is remove this column because we don't need it anymore. And then home, click and load to a table, existing worksheet. Next to that, click OK. So there we are. We have a supply information that was previously in this format converted into a table in a few easy steps. So that is the power of Power Query.